Lecture number 8. I'm going to introduce rhetoric, and I'm going to distinguish it from dialectic and logic, and we're going to say a little bit about some of the nice insights that Scott Crider has in his book. We'll do this a little bit from Aristotle, and that'll be it. So, I'm going to start with Crider, and the first question is, what is Aristotle's definition of rhetoric? So let's see how Crider interprets Aristotle's definition of rhetoric, so that we can see what we're getting into. And you know what? I'm going to kind of introduce this in my own way first, real quick. I just want to draw your attention to the first lecture when we talked about Boethius and the consolation of philosophy. This might be just a way for you to kind of see how rhetoric and logic are different. Lady philosophy appears to Boethius, the narrator, and sings him poems. That might be a way to kind of understand what the connection between logic and rhetoric is. Everything that Lady Philosophy says is correct and true, but she says it in a way that is pleasing to Boethius, the narrator. And so rhetoric is supposed to be, it can be misused. Aristotle makes a note about how that can happen. But what rhetoric is supposed to be is you tell the truth, but you do it in a way that is pleasing to whatever your audience might be. And in particular, it's in a way pleasing to kind of a large number of people, the multitudes, that are, in general, it's harder to sort of work through a syllogism with a large group of people. So you sort of need to speak in a more rhetorical way. The bigger, and I don't want to be mean about it, but sort of the less educated your audience is. So that's one way to kind of understand what rhetoric is about. But let's go to page 5 of the Crider reading. And at the top of page 5, he says, according to Aristotle, rhetoric is, quote, the faculty of discovering the possible means of persuasion in reference to any subject whatever. So that's his definition. He's right to quote it. This is a direct quote. And it's a little bit confusing, so he kind of breaks it down. We need to discuss that definition at length. There are 3 essential parts to the definition. Generally, rhetoric is a faculty of mind. He's right to point that out. What is a faculty? Go down a couple lines. First, this faculty of mind, go down about 8 lines down the page. Rhetoric is not a formula, but a faculty. Though it involves formulae, it is not essentially formulaic. A formula is a rule of composition, but such rules are themselves the result of thought. For example, every reader of this book is likely a master of contemporary formula of composition, the 5-paragraph essay. He's going to make fun of the 5-paragraph essay pretty soon. The rule is this: every essay has 5 paragraphs, an introduction, 3 points, and a conclusion. 3 other formulae follow. The introduction should be... So he's giving what you usually have as rules in a 5-paragraph essay. Crider is saying that is not rhetoric. Rhetoric is not, here are the rules, here are the boxes you need to check off in order to have a good speech. It is not a set of rules, it's not a formula, it's a faculty. That means it's a good habit. That means it is something that the mind, in a dynamic and sort of living way, learns. It's more like playing ad lib, like jazz fusion. It's not my favorite kind of music, but the way that a kind of a guitar soloist will play a solo, and if he's a good soloist, he'll play a good solo. It's not something that he's ever played before and might not be something he ever plays again. Rhetoric is more like that than it is like, I learned this song and I'm going to play this song. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with formulas, but that's not what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is this faculty, this habit of the mind, this developed habit of the mind. So that's one. It's a developed habit of the mind. Second, 2 other aspects. First, this faculty of mind discovers means of persuasion. Second, so number 2 is it discovers means of persuasion. Second, it does so in particular circumstances. So the second part of it, if you go to page 7, the thing that separates rhetoric from other disciplines and other faculties is that it's always discovering means of persuasion. So what is this faculty about, it's not about playing guitar solos. It's about how to convince somebody. Means of persuasion. That's the second part of the definition. And third, on page 8, he discusses that the other thing that sets rhetoric apart is that it focuses on contingency. It focuses on particular circumstances. So let's kind of step back. So what is rhetoric? What are you going to do as you're learning rhetoric? You're going to be developing a good habit, an ability of the mind, a faculty of the mind regarding persuasion. So that's what it's about. And focusing on the particular circumstances of that scenario. Okay. Let's talk about these contingencies, this third part, the particular circumstances that rhetoric pays attention to. Crider names 4 of them, and he does this on page 8. They are, so page 8, about 8 lines down: genre, subject, audience, purpose. Those are the 4 things that according to Crider, a rhetorician wants to pay attention to when he's making his speech. And again, the word speech I'm using it in a very broad way. It doesn't mean you have to get up on a podium and have a microphone. A speech could be a conversation with a friend. So these are the 4 things to pay attention to. One is genre. So if one's writing a letter, he says, that you sort of write in a certain way when you're writing a letter. You write in another way when you're writing a text and an email. And you're writing another way when you're writing a novel or a poem or a political speech or when you're talking to a friend. And this is a really kind of good point to make. If your genre, if you're writing in the wrong style of the genre, so the style of a different genre, it'll come off as totally fake and weird and nobody's going to want to listen to you. You go up for a political speech and you start speaking in poetry. Who is this guy talking? What's this guy doing here? If you're talking to a friend and you're just having a heart-to-heart conversation and you start using really big fancy words, if you were my friend, I'd be like, who are you trying to impress over here? Are we talking, or are you trying to get accepted to a college or something like that? So paying attention to the genre is really important, because it would really turn your audience off if you do this wrongly. Second contingency that you want to pay attention to is subject. What is it that you're actually talking about? So different subjects, about halfway down page 8, entail different appeals. Each discipline looks at the world differently. The disciplinary vision always allowing both some arguments and precluding others. The paper you wrote in high school for English probably differed from those you wrote for history. The general method of rhetorical investigation is always in creative tension with disciplinary methods. An academic subject demands certain appeals, particular subjects then demand even more refined ones. So, what's the subject in general, the subject that you're talking about? He's right. Depending on what your field is, you're going to write in a different way. I know somebody who has a doctorate in mathematics. His doctoral dissertation was, I think he said it was 15 pages long. That wouldn't even be an acceptable term paper in a humanities curriculum. But this was his doctoral dissertation, because mathematics, they don't need to use as many words. They get to the point, this is what it is, there's lots of numbers and stuff like that, and then the end. If you try to do that in humanities, what's going on? If you try to write like a humanities style paper in the field of mathematics or in the field of physics or something like that, they're going, what are you doing? They're going to laugh you off the stage or whatever. If you're writing a math paper and you don't include any formulas, I would guess you're probably not going to get very far. And it's a very well-known fact that in a humanities book, I think one editor told me, or one publisher told me, every single mathematical formula in a humanities book or in a popular book, either humanities or popular, I think it was popular that this editor was saying, if you're writing a book for a general audience, every single formula that's included in the book, I think, cuts the audience in half. So if you have a whole book and it's just one formula, that's actually going to hurt your reading audience. People are going to flip through, see a formula, forget it. If it's just one, some people will stick with it. If it's two, half of those people are going to put the book down. If it's a whole bunch, forget it. You're not going to reach a popular audience. So again, knowing your subject, now I got into the next one, which is audience, but knowing the subject is important as well. And you're going to write and speak differently depending on what you're talking about. Third, bottom of page 8, about 8 lines up, different audiences demand different approaches. One does not write a letter or an email message the same way to a sibling as to a parent, for example. Academic audiences in particular are peculiar. Educated, critical, even impatient, the academic is a different audience to write for. Academics expect that students will be like them, and one of the things you learn at university is the way to respond academically to the world. So he's absolutely right. Depending on who you're talking to, the way you speak is going to be totally different. If you're sitting and having a beer with a friend at a bar, you're going to speak in a certain way. If you try to speak that way at an academic conference when you're giving a paper, it's totally inappropriate. Nobody's going to take you seriously. If you try to speak the way you speak at an academic conference to your friend at the bar, he's not going to take you seriously. And so and then similar things are going to happen with if they're older or younger, if you're talking to high schoolers, if you're talking to college students, if you're talking to graduate students, if you're talking to, I think maybe even, certain if you're talking to a biker or a whole bunch of, you're giving a speech at a biker rally, there's going to be a certain idiom that you're going to use. There's going to be a certain way that you speak. If you're speaking only to philosophers, there's going to be a certain way that you're able to speak, and that's appropriate to that audience. That wouldn't be appropriate to some other audience. There's maybe certain vocabulary you would use. There are certain things you would talk about and a way you would formulate things and organize things, and so on. So that's audience. And then finally, your purpose. The fourth one is purpose. Fourth, different purposes, page 9, 6 lines down. Different purposes demand different appeals. The reader may believe that the primary purpose of academic writing is a good grade. Such a grade is only a sign, however, a sign of achievement. So what's your goal in giving the speech or in writing this paper? Well, he's saying your primary goal should be to share the intellectual excellence or virtue of understanding. Regardless of the subject, regardless of the professor, the best student is one whose written work persuades the reader, whether a faculty member, a tutor, a fellow student, to take pleasure in the operation of such a mind. He's giving that purpose, but knowing what's my point here? Why am I speaking? And I really want to beg you, as just a member of the human race, to another member of the human race, before you speak or write, ask, what is the point of the words that I'm going to say? If you don't have an answer to that, don't talk. Because sometimes people just talk just to hear themselves speak, and you might not know it, but it's really just frustrating to everybody around them. So before you start a speech or a paper, one of the things to ask is, what is the point of this speech or paper? Is it to get a grade? Okay, he's saying maybe it should be a little bit deeper than that, than just getting a grade. I agree with him. Is it to sell a product? If it's to sell a product, then kind of get to that point. If it's to persuade somebody to make some other particular decision, okay, you want to pay attention to that. If it is to inspire somebody to feel a certain way, just be conscious, at least on some level, of what your goal is in speaking. And again, all of these things, he's making a really good point. These are things that as you become a better rhetorician, you will pay attention to more and more habitually. Okay. What are the 3 parts of rhetoric according to Crider? They are on page 10 at the very top. Second line on page 10. The elements of the form of, okay. Invention, organization, and style. So let's talk about each of those. Invention, Organization and style are the parts of rhetoric. Invention, I'm just going to stick with that paragraph. Invention is what you argue. Okay, so you're going to sort of, I don't know why this is called invention. There's kind of an old, kind of traditional usage of that word to mean that. Invention is what you're arguing. Organization is what order you argue. That's fine. I think that's what we mean by organization usually. And style is how you argue. So an essay's substance is the invention or discovery, both of the argument that guides the proofs or points, and of the proofs that themselves defend that argument. So what does invention mean? Invention means the main idea that you want to present and defend. It's both of those. It's your thesis and it's the argument for that thesis. That's the sort of invention. Maybe it's the part that you need to be most inventive about. I don't know why it's called that, whatever. Organization is what's the smartest way, what's the best, most persuasive way to order the words that I'm going to use in order to accomplish this goal that this invention is trying to accomplish. And third, style. What manner of speech should I be really casual? Should I be really formal? Should I be enthusiastic? Should I be like gentle? Should I be kind of angry a little bit? All of this has to do with style. Those are the three parts of rhetoric. Now, again, like with all the reading that we're doing, I'm not going to tell you every single thing that Crider says in his book. I'm assuming you're doing the reading. This one is really, really worth your reading. Please do read all of the assignments from this book. He's a really good writer, and he has a lot of good things to say. So that is the first three questions. Let's go to the Aristotle reading. What are the differences between logic, dialectic, and rhetoric? I actually find this pretty insightful. Jump all the way to page 19 of the PDF that's posted there. And here I just have a chart where I've distilled a lot of what Aristotle's doing in the reading. So you see on the left of that top chart, logic, dialectic, and rhetoric. On the left it says science, and then under that it says logic, dialectic, and rhetoric. Next to that it's material. After that, to the right of that is product. To the right of that is end or goal. The word end means goal or purpose. Okay. So let's think about what logic is. Logic uses, what's the material that logic uses? Ideally, demonstrative logic uses necessarily true and primary premises, things that are known with absolute certainty. That's ideally what logic is supposed to have as its material. The product of logic, what it produces, is logical syllogisms. And the goal of logic is to prove something without any doubt, to prove something scientifically, a demonstration, in other words. That's what logic is attempting to do. What is dialectic? Dialectic is kind of an in-between thing. Most of what we do in the humanities is probably closer to dialectic than it is to logic. What does dialectic use as its material when it writes or speaks? It uses generally accepted opinions, especially those of the wise. So it might not be something like what dialectic has as its material doesn't necessarily need to be something that nobody could possibly deny. It's enough that it's, well, the majority of people seem to be okay with this opinion. Let me use this opinion and build on it. What is the product that dialectic produces? Dialectical syllogisms. So what is a dialectical syllogism? It's a syllogism where the premises are, like I just said, generally accepted opinions. So actually most of what we were doing in the logic courses was actually dialectic. I wasn't doing like, a line is breadthless depth. I wasn't using premises that are like absolutely undeniable, mostly. So dialectical syllogism and inductions. I don't want to go into what induction is. Don't worry about that right now. What is the goal of dialectic? Well, it doesn't prove things scientifically. What does it do? Mental training. So what I was talking about, exercising your mind to become stronger. It can be a part of a serious conversation, as opposed to, well, this is what I feel and this is what you feel. Okay, end of conversation. No. Why do you think that? What is it that leads you to come to that conclusion? And maybe you can't prove it. beyond the shadow of a doubt, but oh man, you're really making me think. I never thought about things that way. That's one of the goals of dialectic. And then third, there's a lot of sciences that use dialectic in their proofs, or in their compiling evidence. And when you're writing a paper and here's the evidence and here's the statistics and here's this, that's really an exercise of dialectic. Now, compare those two to what rhetoric is. What does rhetoric use? Rhetoric uses whatever's available. Whatever's available. It can use some logic. It'll use some generally accepted opinions. It'll use maybe probabilities. It'll use science. It'll use the person's opinion that you're talking to. It'll use whatever is available for the speech. What is the product? The product really is a speech, but here I'm using the word entomeme. You guys already know what that is from logic. And it uses it produces examples, paradigms. It produces speeches, basically. And the goal of rhetoric is to convince people, to persuade people. You see, there's a difference between persuading people and proving something scientifically. So you can have a proof that's perfectly scientific, and people might not understand it. So you didn't convince them, even though you proved it. And on the other side, you can actually convince people of something that's not proven or not even true. So you can see now gradually how rhetoric can be misused in the wrong hands. So that's the difference between logic, dialectic, and rhetoric. How can rhetoric be misused according to Aristotle? Go back to page 8, I guess, is where he talks about this. Yeah, page 8, about 3 lines down. If it be objected that one who uses such power of speech unjustly might do great harm, that is a charge which may be made in common against all good things except virtue, and above all against the things that are the most useful, as strength, health, wealth, generalship. So how can rhetoric be misused? Well, it can be used to really harm a community. You can convince people to do things that are only for your benefit and not for theirs. You can even convince people to do things that are going to hurt them. And Aristotle says, yes, and he's replying to that objection. He's saying, yes, but you can say the same thing about money and about health and whatever else, power. All these things can be used to hurt people. But that doesn't mean that they're bad things. And so he's saying in this book, I'm going to show you the right way to use rhetoric. Namely, what is the right way to use rhetoric? To defend the truth and to explain and persuade people of the truth and what's actually good and truly good. All right. I'm going real fast today. Happy about this. What are the 3 types of speeches according to Aristotle, and what are their goals? This is very important, and I find it very insightful. Go to page 20. That's kind of sideways in the PDF. 3 types of speeches. If you look at the left column, it says speech, and then there's deliberative. Each of these has 2 names. It's very annoying, but I'm going to call them deliberative is one type of speech. Judicial is another kind of speech. And ceremonial is a third kind of speech. These are 3 kinds of speeches. What are their goals? What's the difference between a deliberative, judicial, and ceremonial speech? The goal, go right halfway across. It says goal right in the middle column. The goal of a deliberative speech is to convince somebody to do or not do something. So and this is maybe the majority of speeches are deliberative. Maybe not that, but a lot of speeches are attempting to persuade somebody to make a choice. Okay? Now the choice can be, I want to persuade you to agree with me on this thing that I'm saying about Homer's Odyssey or something like that. But that's still a deliberative speech. But the goal is to do or not do something. If you're giving a speech as a politician, you want people to vote for you, that is a deliberative speech. If you're a car salesman and you want to talk somebody into buying a car, that's a deliberative speech. Deliberation is what you do before you make a choice. That is a deliberative speech. What is a judicial speech or forensic speech? A forensic or judicial speech, just think about you're in a jury or you're a lawyer. It is to defend or accuse someone. So a judicial speech is where you attempt to prove yourself or somebody else innocent or maybe guilty, I don't know. That would be a forensic or judicial speech. The goal of it, the goal of a judicial speech is to show that somebody is guilty or innocent, to accuse or defend someone. Now, let me make a point that maybe you've already thought about. Can't a judicial speech be part of a deliberative speech? Absolutely. When a lawyer is defending a client, really that's a deliberative speech because he's trying to convince the jury to say that he's innocent, to vote that his client is innocent. That's a choice. But in doing that, so inside of that deliberative speech, there's a judicial speech in that circumstance. Okay. The third type of speech is a ceremonial speech, also called an epidectic. Don't worry about epidectic. So a ceremonial speech. What is the goal of a ceremonial speech? To praise or blame someone or something. When would you use a ceremonial speech? The paradigm that I want you to have in your mind is the speech of the best man or maid of honor at a wedding. There's no choice that needs to be made. They're not convincing the people at the wedding to do something or not do something. They're also not arguing that this person's guilty or innocent against some accusation. What are they doing? Oh man, gosh, Fred, you're one of my best friends, and I was so honored that you chose me to be your best man. Guys, let me tell you something about Fred. And you're just praising. That's what a ceremonial speech does. So a best man or maid of honor speech is a ceremonial speech. A eulogy at a funeral, there's no choice to be made. And the guy's already dead, or she's already dead. You don't really need to defend or accuse her. Okay? You're just praising somebody. Or, I don't know, I can't really think of examples off the top of my head of blaming a ceremonial speech where you're just blaming somebody just so that people dislike them, not for any court reason. Okay, so those are the three types of speech. What are the three means of persuasion? This is another very important thing, and I'm going to come back to the three types of speech and the three means of persuasion a lot in the rhetoric portion of this course. Three means of persuasion, bottom of page 19. You're going to learn some Greek words. I've taught you some Latin. When we're doing logic, let's learn some Greek now. The Greek term on the left, the first one is ethos. The second one is logos. The third one is pathos. What does ethos mean? This is the first means of persuasion. How are the ways that you can persuade somebody? What are the three ways? There are three ways to persuade people. Number one, ethos means the character of the speaker. What does it mean that the character of the speaker is important, is one of the means of persuasion? Your ethos. Because people aren't going to believe somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about, that is not virtuous, isn't really a good person. If you're not a good person, why would I listen to you when you're trying to persuade me of something? You don't even care about me. Maybe you're a good person, but how have you demonstrated that you care about me at all? So the ethos of the speaker is your character as the speaker, how you present yourself. Do you present yourself as somebody who is believable, who's fair, who cares about them, who's a decent person? That's what ethos means. I want to make a note here. If you go back to page 20, and if you look at deliberative speeches, and you go all the way across to the means, so what Aristotle does is he says, well, each of these means of persuasion is associated mostly with one of the three types of speeches. And I think he has a really important point here. Look at deliberative speeches. What is the most important means in getting somebody to make a decision? It's actually not what you say. It's the way you present yourself. You're the character of the speaker. If you are a believable, virtuous, caring person that knows what they're talking about, that is the most important thing in convincing somebody to make a choice, according to Aristotle. It's more important than what you say, and it's more important than how you make your audience feel. And I think he's right about that. The way you present yourself is extremely important. And it is something that the vast majority of politicians are absolutely terrible at. They'll present themselves, there's like, yeah, I'm this tough guy, or I'm this caring person, and they're like, it's just fake. It's not believable. Your ethos has to be believable, which means you have to actually be the person that you're pretending to be. Which is, you see how, again, you can misuse rhetoric, you can pretend and fake people out, sometimes, maybe, if you're a good actor or something like that, but that's a misuse of rhetoric. What Aristotle's saying is, be a good person, actually know what you're talking about, actually care about your audience, and then just kind of be yourself, and they'll see that, and that'll make you believable. That's what ethos is about. The second means of persuasion is logos. The word logos means a word, but it's the words of the speech. Convince the audience that you're right about this thing. This is where logos is related to logic. This is the argument you're going to make. These are the points you're going to make. Here's your evidence. It's very important. I'm not saying ethos is everything, that as long as you're believable, everyone's just going to do whatever you say. No, but it is important. It's more important than people think. But if you have the best ethos in the world and you don't know what you're talking about, or your words are all jumbled, your argument is not clear, your evidence isn't there, no, you're going to mess that up too. So logos is important. He associates it with forensic or judicial speeches. That one I'm not so sure about. I think the connection between ethos and deliberative is clearer to me than logos and judicial speeches. The third one, though, is pathos. Pathos is the emotion of the audience. That's a means of persuasion. And again, look at how dangerous this can be. If you know how to manipulate people's emotions, it can be so dangerous. What is the sort of proper use of this? Again, Aristotle's all about telling the truth here. If you, and I mean this as somebody who gives a lot of speeches all the time. If you want your audience to feel a certain way, feel it yourself first, and feel it during the speech. And that directness, that honesty, that kind of opening up your heart and just sharing the way you feel, that's much more effective than any manipulative way that you can get them to feel a certain thing. Feel it yourself and then just sort of open your mouth and it'll kind of happen. So again, honesty is not just the proper way to use rhetoric, it's actually the best way to use rhetoric. It's the most effective way. But we are going to spend a whole day of class in a few weeks just talking about the emotions and what to talk about to evoke certain emotions. So that's the third means of persuasion, according to Aristotle. And that is how they're related to the three. Oh, sorry. And pathos, if you go back to the chart on the next page, pathos is related to ceremonial speeches. I think that's basically right. You want people to feel certain ways when you're giving, a eulogy or something like that. So I think that's basically right. I included Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson there, this nice poem. I don't remember, I haven't taught this rhetoric class in a long time, so I don't remember what the point I was trying to make with that poem. But, I don't know, read it, and it's a great poem if you haven't read it. I think it's a ceremonial speech. I don't think he's making any, he's trying to get to people to make any decisions. Maybe it was an example of a ceremonial speech, I don't know. Anyway, that's it for today. I will see you next class. We're going to talk in particular about deliberative speeches.